So we'll discuss some Inyani Purim. So there are many mitzvahs on the day of Purim. We're familiar with the mitzvah of Kriyas HaMegillah, the mitzvah of reading the Megillah. We read at night and during the day. There's the mitzvah of having a Suda, of having a meal. And as well, there's a mitzvah of Mishlach Manos Ishu Reyehu Umatanas Lavyonim. There's a mitzvah of giving gifts to one friend and gifts to the poor. And the Gemara tells us that you fulfill your minimal obligation of Mishlach Manos by 2 gifts to one person. In contrast to Matanas Lavyonim, you have to give 2 different poor people, and we assume the amount of money it takes to eat a Suda. So whatever the amount is that one could buy a meal, that's how much one should give, minimally speaking, for a Matanas Lavyonim. So we'll focus tonight a little bit on the mitzvah of Mishlach Manos Ishu Reyehu. What is the nature of the mitzvah? We do it, the Megillah tells us, Mishlach Manos Ishu Reyehu Matanas Lavyonim. But what is the basis behind Mishlach Manos? So there are actually 2 schools of thought, and others say it, but they're known as the school of thought of the Trumas Hadeshen, and on the other side is the Manos Halevi. So it's hard to say it's a machlok, it's a dispute, because the Trumas Hadeshen is quoted in halacha many times. The Manos Halevi, he was a Kabbalist in Tzvat. He wrote the Wachal the Friday night service, the Wachal Dodi, Roal Kabat. So it's hard to say it's a machlokes between the 2, but let's say it's 2 different aspects anyway of Mishlach Manos. The Trumas Hadeshen says the purpose of Shalach Manos, or Mishlach Manos, is, as I pointed out, since we have a mitzvah of Suda, since we have a mitzvah of eating the Suda on Purim, so to ensure that there's enough food, a person has what to eat for Purim, so Chazal instituted the mitzvah of Mishlach Manos, or the Nevi'im instituted in the Megillah. And in fact, the way some commentators explain, really, it's also it's similar base to the mitzvah of Matanas Lavyonim, that really the purpose is mostly to ensure that the poor people have food for the Suda. But in order not to single out, not to embarrass the poor, so therefore they made a general mitzvah among all Jews that they should be giving Mishlach Manos to one another. And in fact, that's what Rav Reuven Magarlis writes, that why the custom of putting on costumes on Purim. So the many answers. The Nefachah is a reversal, but the Rav Reuven Magarlis points out, because since it's a mitzvah, all year round we have a mitzvah giving tzedakah, but you could do your due diligence. On Purim, any poor person that sticks out his hand and says needs money, you have to give them. It doesn't say how much you have to give them something, but you have to give them. So since the custom was for poor people, they waited all year round for Purim, as the Gemara tells us. One of the reasons the Gemara gives, why don't we read the Megillah on Shabbos, when it could fall out on Shabbos? The only time it could fall out on Shabbos now is in Yerushalayim, on Tetzvav, the way our calendars are set up. But fundamentally, why don't we read Megillah on Shabbos? So the Gemara gives the famous reason of Gzeira Derava, that we're afraid you're going to carry, like we have by Shofar and we have by Lulav. But there's another reason the Gemara gives, because the eyes of the poor people are waiting all year round for Purim. They know there are no questions asked. You go, you ask for tzedakah, you get it. So therefore, imagine the disappointment. Shabbos, sorry, I don't have any money. It's Shabbos, I can't help you. So Chazal, the sensitivity wanted to make sure that the poor are embarrassed, so the minhag developed among Klal Yisrael of wearing costumes and wearing masks. So similarly, that's the point of Shalach Manos. It's the same as Matan Sulav Yonim for the Suda. And in fact, that seems to be the opinion of the Rambam. The Rambam writes, when he talks about the mitzvah of the Suda, he connects the mitzvah of Suda with the with Mishalach Manos. And we know from the Rambam you can bring geographical proofs. Where the Rambam brings down halacha is very telling about the halacha. So the Rambam brings down Hilchas Suda, so therefore we know that Shalach Manos is connected to the Suda. And in fact, when you have a Purim Mishuash in Yerushalayim, when you have a 3-day Purim, you split it up. You read the Megillah on one day, you say the Al Anisim on another day, Pimei Mordechai, and you have the Suda on another day. So there's a discussion exactly which day is what, but what commentators point out is, but all are in agreement that whatever day you have the Suda, that's the day you have the mitzvah of Mishalach Manos, because it's a din in the Suda. That's one school of thought, the school of thought of the Trumas Hadeshin. The other school of thought is Manos Halevi. And he wanted to say it's to be Marbe Shalom Yisrael, is to facilitate friendships and bring people closer. As we know, in the Megillah, the Medrash tells us, the Gemara tells us, that Haman told Achashverosh, we have to kill the Jews. So Achashverosh said, I'm not attacking the Jews, I'm afraid of the God. The God's going to kill me. So Haman said, you don't have to worry. Yeshnu am echad mafur, don't worry, the Jewish people are fighting among one another. There is no achdus. There is no togetherness, and then you don't have to worry. The God of Israel hates when the Jews are fighting one another. And Achashverosh bought into that. So he says, if the cause is because they were fighting, so we want to make sure, you make sure you give gifts to one's friends to either start a new friendship or to strengthen the previous friendship. But it's based on shalom. So we have two schools of thought. We have the Trumas Hadeshin, that the purpose of Mishalach Manos is to have food for the Suda, and according to the Manos Halevi, the purpose is to be Marbe Shalom. So, my nafkamina, what's the practical difference? Whether I say the reason for Shalach Manos is the Suda or Shalom, so there are a couple of them the post can bring down. One is, and this is brought down in the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, what happens today, people give many Mishalach Manos. They give 10, 20, 30, some people give 100 or more. But strictly speaking, what you need is to give to one person two items. So, assuming you're only giving one, if you're giving 99 and this only happens on one, it's not an issue. Assuming this is the only one you're giving, you go over to the person, you say, Happy Purim, he has the Mishalach Manos for you, and he sees what a beautiful Shalach Manos, all the good candy, etc. And he says, thanks, but no thanks. We really appreciate it, but we have so much food in my house, my wife will kill me. It's okay. We don't need the Shalach Manos. So the question the Ramah raises, does one fulfill the mitzvah? The one who gave the Shalach Manos but was never accepted, do you get the mitzvah of Mishalach Manos or not? So the Ramah writes, yes. The Ramah writes, Mechila helps. Foregoing your honor helps when it comes to Mishalach Manos. And so, which school of thought is the Ramah seem to be working with? He seems to be working with the opinion of the Manos Halevi, that it's all about Shalom. By you sending the Shalach Manos, you are showing you want to make peace. But if the purpose of Shalach Manos is to ensure the person has food for the Suda, you can't eat a thank you. It might be very nice what you did, but you can't eat a thank you, and therefore it wouldn't be good. So that seems to be this issue, whether if one is mocha and the person doesn't accept your Shalach Manos, whether you fulfill your mitzvah or not, seems to be depending on this issue. And we'll come back to this shortly. And another nafkamina, another issue is, let's say you bring someone an iPad, and an iPhone, a BlackBerry, a tablet. You give someone a beautiful Mishlach Manos, but it's not food. It's electronics, it's clothing. Can you fulfill your mitzvah with a non-edible, a non-food item? So again, it should depend on this issue. If the purpose is a Suda, then you can't eat an iPad. You might be able to find where the closest restaurant is, but you're not going to be able to eat the iPad. But if the purpose is Shalom, I think a person would be a lot happier with an iPad than they would be a box of raisins or some popcorn. So it would seem to depend on this issue. So regarding Mechila, the Ramah writes it works. Regarding our minig, we seem to be machmir that you give food items. In fact, the Magen Avraham says not only should you give food items, but it should be food items that are going to be used at a meal. So for instance, gefilte fish, chopped liver, a pastrami, a salami, meat, soup, something which is usually used for a Suda, that's what one should give it. But things which aren't, again, you're still Yotze, but L'chatchila, the Magen Avraham says, is to make sure that you give food, that you should try to give a food item. Another practical difference would be if a person gave anonymously. In other words, you come and happen, you're out busy giving out your own Mishlach Manos, you're running around, getting ready for the meal, you're shopping, whatever you're doing, and you get home and you find a beautiful basket of Shalach Manos sitting at your doorstep. But there's no card. The card flew away, it was never left, it got lost, and you have no idea who brought this Mishlach Manos. It's that person who dropped it off is the anonymous giver to fulfill the mitzvah. So if the purpose is to have food for the Suda, then why not? You have food for the Suda. But if the purpose of the meal is to be Mar B'Shalom, I guess you could say, someone loves you, but you don't really know who, and therefore it's not necessarily going to foster a specific relationship. So that's what. So those are some in the nafkamina. So we have two schools of thought of the Trumas Hadeshen and the Manos Levi, whether it's based on Suda, based on Shalom. And we gave a couple of nafkaminas, Mechila, if one forgoes their honor, they say thanks but no thanks, or it's an anonymous giver, or it's a non-food item. Those could be some practical differences between the Manos Levi and the Trumas Hadesh, and I'll have to go into more. We'll continue next time. I'll go into how does the Ramah know this, that by Shalach Manos, if you say thanks but no thanks, it's good. And what about Matanos Lavyonim? If the poor person doesn't accept, is that still good? And then in terms of getting into the nature of the mitzvah of Shalach Manos, and in terms of what's the basis in the Gemara, so we'll continue next time on the Mishlach Manos part 2. So we'll continue our discussion on the mitzvah of Mishlach Manos Ish L'Re'ehu. So we discussed last time, we'll quickly review and continue on. We discussed the two schools of thought on what is the nature of the mitzvah of Shalach Manos. So there's the famous pshat of the Trumas Hadeshen, The Trumas Hadeshin says the purpose of Mishalach Manos is to have food for the Suda. And it's based on, as well as similar to Matanos Lavyonim, to ensure the poor person has food, and therefore not to single out the poor. So therefore, if everyone's giving food, it will also enable even the poor, but everyone to have food for the Suda. And that seems to be the pshat in the Rambam. The Rambam, when he talks about, he puts together the mitzvah of Suda, the mitzvah of having the meal, with the mitzvah of Mishalach Manos. So we bring a geographical proof in the Rambam that he holds it to din in the Suda. In fact, there's a Magen Avram based on a Rashi. There's a Gemara in Megillah about two poor brothers who were very poor. And the Gemara says, Mechalfai Sudusa, they used to switch Sudas every year. So Pashas is, like the Ran writes, that like I used to do, you go to, I used to go with my friend in the YU cafeteria per morning. He bought me breakfast, I bought him breakfast, and that was Mishalach Manos. But Rashi writes something else. Rashi writes, they switched off. One year, he had the Suda, the next year the other person did the Suda. The question is, Mishalach Manos isn't a biannual mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah that's done every 2 years, every other year. It's done every year. So what's the pshat in the Rashi? So the Magen Avram seems to be working with the Rambam that there's a chiddush, Rashi, that we see if you're not having a Suda, so then there's no mitzvah of Mishalach Manos. So Mishalach Manos is tied into the Suda. And then we have, on the other hand, we have the Manos Halevi, who says the purpose of Mishalach Manos is Laharbo Sholem Reyes Ba'olam. And therefore, based on what Haman said to Achashverosh, Yeshnu Am Echad, Mafur Mafuzar, the reason why the reason is the Jews are fighting, he told Achashverosh, you don't have to worry, and we'll be able to be successful in our decree to kill them. So at first Achashverosh was reluctant, but when he heard they were fighting and there was machokes, so he knew that there's a chance of it working out, and therefore he went along with it. So the two schools of thought in terms of whether Sholach Manos is based on Suda, it's the purpose that we have food to eat at the Purim meal, or is it based on the fact that it's Shalom, that to be Marbe Shalom, to make friends, make new friends, to machazik pre-existing friends. So that's the two schools of thought. My nafkamina. So the Chasim Sofer and others quote the Ramah. The Ramah writes in Hilchos Purim, the Mechila Mahani b'Misholach Manos. That the Ramah writes that Mechila works. If again, the halacha of Mishalach Manos, you only have to give one gift. You have to give the one person 2 manos, 2 different foods. So we give many, we give hundreds of Shalach Manos, or 10s, 20s, 30s. So this question only applies if you're giving one. The one person you give it to says, thanks but no thanks. Whatever the reason is, I don't want it. Do you fulfill your mitzvah of Mishalach Manos? The Ramah writes, yes. The Tama Pri Chadash. And the Pri Chadash says, where does the Ramah know this? That if you don't accept, it's good. And then would that work on Matanos Lavyonim also? Because the halacha is by Matanos Lavyonim that the ani has to accept. So why is it, where does the Ramah get this from? To make a distinction between the mitzvah of Mishalach Manos Ish L'Re'eho and Matanos Lavyonim. That Mechila works by Mishalach Manos, but doesn't work by Matanos. So where does the Ramah know this from? So It's an interesting binyan tzion. He points out that if you look at the pasuk says umishalach manos Israel. The mitzvah is sending the manos. So if I send it, so even if the person doesn't accept it, my mitzvah has been accomplished. But it says umatanas lavyonim. Matana always implies miyad liyad, from hand to hand. So that's how we can say the Ramah got it from the psukim. But what's the logic behind it? What's the logic behind the Ramah that Mechila works? That's what Chasam Sof and others point out. It seems to be that the Trumas Hadesh, that the Ramah is working with the Manos Halevi, that the whole purpose is to be Marbeh Shalom. So if you send something, even though he ends up returning it, you still get the mitzvah. And according to the Trumas Hadeshin, perhaps it would be problematic because you need something to eat for the meal. In fact, that's a whole discussion in the poskim regarding shlichus. Because there's some achronim who say, l'chumra, that you have to send it with the shliach. And some perhaps even say b'di'evet. What's the issue? Whether you need, whether the shliach. So again, the pasuk says, u'mishalach manos ish l'reyeyu u'matanos ravyonim. So, in terms of the whole discussion, what's considered more chashav? Is it more chashav to do it yourself? Is to send it with someone? So, if the purpose is just to have the Suda, so then you could say, so what's the difference? As long as he gets the food, shlucho shel adam kamoso. But if the purpose is to make shalom, so the poskim suggests that if you're doing it yourself, obviously different situations, some might warrant a third party, but generally speaking, if you do it yourself, you're showing your ava, your love for the person, and therefore perhaps there as well. And then we discuss other nafkaminas. We discussed the question, this interesting Birkei Yosef we didn't discuss, but we name a sefer Birkei Yosef nistapik im sholach manos v'chavero tarnagolas v'achav nimsu treifa im yatsi de chovoso, that you send them a treif chicken, like you didn't, obviously not on purpose, but you send them a chicken, you thought it was good, or a piece of meat, and it ended up being, so I guess if someone sends you non-kosher misholach manos by mistake, if it's intentional, then he's showing he doesn't like you. But let's say it's a mistake. So perhaps it's dependent on this issue. On one hand, that you sent him a nice piece of chicken, so that's good for shalom. But ultimately, he couldn't use it for the suda, so therefore it wouldn't work. And then we pointed out an anonymous giver, you find it at the door, and you don't know who gave it to you. So if the purpose is shalom, or there's no shalom, you don't know who sent it. If the purpose is suda, so then it would work. If it's suda, it would work if you have food. And that's like the Magen Avram and the poskim write, it's best to give food that's ready to be eaten. Because if the purpose, because like the Trumas Hadeshin, that the purpose is for the suda, you might as well give chopped liver, chicken soup, fish, things that will be used for the suda and not elsewhere. And based on this Ramah about the Mechila works, there's a whole discussion in terms of, and we gave a share on it before, on why no bracha on the mitzvah of Misholach Manos. So we know there's a famous answer of the Rashba, why we don't make a bracha on tzedakah in general, that since it's dependent on someone else, different versions of the Rashba as we went into last time, there's 3 days and others, but since it's a mitzvah which is totally dependent on someone else, so therefore you don't make a bracha. But the question is, according to the Ramah, it's not dependent on someone else. as long as you send it, you get the mitzvah. So you have a why no bracha. So they come on to, that's the Shitas HaRambam, that we don't make a bracha on mitzvahs be'adam l'chaveiro. But in Echanav, you would make a bracha normally, but since it's a mitzvah, Chazal only included the bracha on mitzvahs be'adam l'makom. But a mitzvah be'adam l'chaveiro, Chazal never included the bracha, as the Mefarshim explain. Imagine someone coming to your door, and they're hungry, they're starving, they want to eat. And you say, great, you go to the kitchen, you go get the food, and you say, wait a second, Baruch, Atah, Hashem, you start making a bracha, and the time you finish the bracha, the guy faints from hunger. So Chazal did not want to institute a bracha when it gets in the way of fulfilling the mitzvah. So along those lines, it's 3-8 says even further. He says, you know why there's no bracha Mishlach Manos? Because the whole bracha undermines the purpose. He's working with the Manos HaLevi's explanation that the purpose of Mishlach Manos is to be Marbe Shalom. So you're saying, you know what? Here, I'm bringing over a Shalach. You know why? Because God's making me, the Chachamim are making me, so I'm doing it. So the whole point is to make Shalom, and you're going to say, I'm doing it because I have to. That's not going to lead to Shalom. So therefore, the Sridei writes, the reason why there's no bracha on Mishlach Manos is because a bracha here would undermine the whole essence of which is to be Marbe Shalom. And in fact, these two reasons also depend on people talk about the issue of sending it at night, but you're eating it during the day. So I want to suggest, perhaps according to the Trumas Hadeshen, it would be good, because the bottom line, you're eating it during the day. But because according to the Manos Levi, the Iker is, the Mishalo is sending it, is creating a friendship. So therefore, if you have the Iker mitzvah is to be done b'yom, so if the Iker is to be Marbe Shalom, so perhaps you should be doing that during the daytime. But according to the Trumas Hadeshen, that the Iker is the Suda, so perhaps if one sent it earlier and got it, it would be good. That's a discussion in the Gemara. Regarding the Gemara about Mechila, and perhaps another source for the Ramah, where he got it from, how does he know Mechila works? Because there's a Gemara in Megillah, Dav Zayin, that says a rabbi sent a big piece of meat and a big keg of wine. And it says, Kiyamta beno, he sent back as you fulfilled Shalach Manas and Matanas Rav Yonim. So over there the Mefarshim point out he was also poor. So it's Matanas Rav Yonim. And maybe the husband and wife is too. But how could you fulfill both? You only gave one piece of meat and one keg of wine. So perhaps it gets into the question is, if you give a big portion, which is really 5 portions, so maybe it counts for more. But perhaps the Ramah got it from this. How does the Ramah know that he could be mocha? Because that's what happened. He gave him first for Shalach Manos. He said thanks, but no thanks. So you fulfilled Mishalach Manos. And then he gave him Atanas Rav Yonim. And therefore he was able to fulfill both with one Maisa. And we see from the Manos Levi, Iker seems to be the sending part, and for the Trumas Hadeshen, the Iker seems to be the receiving part. And just to conclude, there's perhaps also there's another Gemara that maybe ties into all of this. There's in the Sefer She'iris Yosef, a woman who was actually a Rebbe in Hank, maybe he still is, I'm not sure, out in Long Island. And he quotes from Menachem Zemba, that one of the great rabbis I believe he was killed by the Nazis. He quotes the famous Gemara Megillah and Dav Yud Beis Amud Aleph. And we know the purpose of Navi, the purpose of Nach, is supposed to learn different lessons. We're supposed to learn things. And therefore usually the Navi tells us what's wrong, and then we correct ourselves and we become better. But it's interesting to note that the Megillah never tells us what's sin. Whatever happened that what did the Jews do to deserve a gzeira, decree lahashmid, ulaharag, as called Yehudim tafunashim? What did the Jews do to deserve it? The Megillah never tells us. So there's an interesting Gemara in Megillah, Daf Yud Beis. They asked the students, "Ma nischayvu soneim shel Yisrael." That what did the Jews do to deserve to be killed? So they asked the students, and the students answered, I think it was Rosh Shimon Bar Yochai, it isn't quoted here, but so the Gemara says, he said to his student, what do you think? Interactive teaching. You tell me, Tommy, then what do you think? So they said, because Shenana Misudat Achashverosh. Shenana Misudat She'osa Rosh, because the Jews got enough on the Suda of Achashverosh. So the Rabbi said that would be a good reason. However, that only helped for the people of Shushan. Only Shushan people were ate at the Suda. But what about everyone else? Because you're right. It was based on because the Jews worship idols, at least outwardly. In the time of Nebuchadnezzar, they bowed down out of fear. So therefore, the decree was only also outwardly. The decree was going to be lahashman, laharag, to be killed, but it was never led to fruition. So Rabbi Menachem Zembis has a beautiful explanation. He says, the Gemara suggests two possibilities. Maskana, what was the reason for the decree of Haman? Lahashmid, lahara is called Yehudim. So they point out that the issue of Suda from Achashverosh or Avodah Zarah. So Rabbi Menachem Zembis explains, we know, the Gemara tells us, Gadol HaShalom, that Shalom is so great that sometimes Hashem's willing to overlook even Avodah Zarah. When people are bi'achdus, when the Jews are together, so that can even forgive the sin of Avodah Zarah. And Sheneda Misudas Achashverosh, if the sin was Neda Misudas Achashverosh, so the tikkun is that we have a Suda on Purim. So Rabbi Menachem Zembis explained these could be the two schools of thought, where the Manos Halevi and the Trumas Hadeshin got it from. The Trumas Hadeshin is focusing on the first part. Shenena Misudas Achashverosh. If the Iker sin was the Suda, so how do you rectify it? By giving Mishalach Manos and having a meal, because the whole purpose of Mishalach Manos is for the Suda. But according to the Manos Halevi, that the whole purpose of the Mishalach Manos is to be Marbe Shalom. So the sin was Avodah Zarah. And therefore, how do we rectify Avodah Zarah? By going the opposite way, by being Marbe Shalom, with people meet new friends and reinforce our own friendship. So this could be the Gemara is the source for the Manos Halevi and the Trumas Hadeshin, where the Suda and the Shalom come into play. And we gave different practical differences about whether you have to give food, whether non-food items work, an anonymous giver, does mechila work? It ties into the issue of bracha or no bracha, giving someone non-kosher by mistake. And we said the Ramah got his opinion of mechila from the Gemara, from the Megillah, that it says in Mishalach Manos Ishrei Umatas Ravyonim, that the mitzvah of Mishalach Manos is sending, that's the Yikr, to be Mar B'Shalom, but the Yikr of Matas Ravyonim is that the Ani gets the food, and therefore mechila works by Mishalach Manos, but it doesn't work by Matanas Ravyonim.